Rain had fallen all night on the ravine, and the old metal bridge still dripped water when Daniel walked out to check the power relays. He was not thinking about dragons that morning. He was thinking about the loose bolt on Relay 4 and whether he had enough coffee left in his flask to get through the shift. The frontier outpost was quiet at that hour, just a handful of workers moving between the sheds and the wind carrying the smell of wet stone from the cliffs below. He almost missed her. She was curled into a gap between two support beams, small enough to fit in his arms, her scales a dull grey-blue that blended with the shadows. At first he thought she was a wounded bird, some large frontier creature caught in the storm. Then she lifted her head and looked at him with eyes far too intelligent for a bird, and he realized what he was looking at. A dragon, a baby one. Daniel had heard about the dragonkin who lived on the far side of the ravine, in the high rock spires beyond the trading post. Everyone on the outpost had heard stories. Some workers said the dragons kept to themselves and never bothered anyone. Others said they were dangerous, proud creatures who did not think much of humans at all. Daniel had never seen one up close, not until now. The baby dragon did not move. She watched him the way a small animal watches a predator, frozen and hopping to not be noticed. Daniel crouched down slowly, keeping his hands where she could see them. "Hey there," he said, his voice low. "You look like you've had a rough night." She let out a small sound, somewhere between a growl and a whimper. Her ribs showed faintly under her scales. She was hungry, that much was clear, and probably lost. Daniel did not know much about dragonkin customs, but he knew what a starving animal looked like, and he was not the kind of man who could walk past one. He had half a sandwich left in his jacket pocket, meant for his own lunch. He broke off a piece and set it down on the bridge planks, then stepped back to give her room. For a long moment she did not move. Then, hunger winning out over fear, she crept forward and ate it in one quick bite, her eyes never leaving him. "There you go," Daniel said, smiling despite himself. "Guess you needed that more than I did." He finished his relay check that morning with the baby dragon watching him from a distance. By the time he packed up his tools, she had crept closer, close enough that he could see the pattern on her wings, delicate lines like veins on a leaf. He did not try to touch her. He simply worked and let her be near him, and when he left the bridge to head back to the outpost, he glanced over his shoulder to see her still sitting there, watching him go. He told himself that was the end of it. A stray creature, fed once, forgotten by tomorrow. But the next morning, when Daniel walked out to the bridge with his tool bag over his shoulder, she was there again. Same spot, same watchful eyes, waiting as if she had never left. "You're kidding me," Daniel muttered, stopping in his tracks. He looked around, half expecting some dragonkin adult to appear and claim her, but the ravine was empty except for the wind and the distant call of frontier birds. He walked closer, and she did not flinch this time. She simply watched him, patient, like she already understood something he did not. He gave her the rest of his lunch, that day too. By the end of the week, it had become a routine neither of them spoke about, but both of them kept. Every morning Daniel crossed the bridge to check the relays, and every morning she was waiting at the same spot, tucked between the same two beams, her small head lifting the moment she heard his boots on the metal planks. He started bringing extra food on purpose now, packing a little more than he needed, telling himself it was simply the practical thing to do. A well-fed animal was less likely to cause trouble near outpost equipment, he reasoned. That was the excuse he gave the other workers when they asked why his lunch bag had gotten so much bigger. It was not really about the relays anymore, and some quiet part of him knew that. He started talking to her while he worked, telling her about the outpost, about the broken pump in Shed 3, about anything that came to mind. She could not understand the words, not fully, but she listened with her head tilted, and sometimes she made small sounds back, as if trying to answer. He gave her a name almost without meaning too. Rook, because of the way she perched on the bridge's stone edge like the old chess piece from a board game he'd had as a kid. She never seemed to mind it, whatever chunk of the human tongue she managed to catch. None of the other workers thought much of it at first. A dragon hanging around the bridge was strange, but harmless, and Daniel was known for his soft spot for stray things. What none of them understood, and what Daniel himself did not yet know, was that dragonkin were not like the wild animals of Earth. They did not simply grow fond of kindness and move on. When a hatchling accepted food and comfort from someone during its earliest days, something in its nature locked into place, a bond as permanent as blood. Rook had chosen him, and on that ravine, under that grey frontier sky, neither of them yet understood how much that choice would cost or how much it would change. For now there was only the bridge, the morning light, and a small dragon waiting patiently for the one human who had never once made her wait for nothing. 3 weeks after Daniel first fed her, Rook had grown enough that she could no longer fit fully in the gap between the bridge beams. She had to curl her tail around herself now, wings tucked tight, and even then part of her stretched out past the shadow of the support post. Dragonkin grew fast, faster than any earth creature Daniel had ever heard of, and the change unsettled him more than he let on. He noticed other things too. She understood more words now. When he said, "Wait here," before crossing to check the far relay, she stayed put, her eyes tracking him the whole way across. When he said her name, she lifted her head immediately, ears, or the ridges that passed for ears on a dragon, turning toward the sound. She was learning him as fast as she was growing, and there was something in her gaze lately that felt less like an animal's curiosity and more like recognition. It was around this time that the trouble started, though Daniel did not see it coming. He was refilling his water flask near Shed 3 when Rutger, one of the senior maintenance workers, pulled him aside. Rutger had been on the frontier outpost longer than anyone, long enough to have seen dragonkin do things most of the younger workers had only heard about in warning stories. "You need to stop feeding that thing," Rutger said, glancing toward the bridge. "She's not causing trouble," Daniel said. "She just sits there." For now, Rutger's voice was flat, serious in a way that made Daniel actually listen. "You don't know dragonkin like I do. They don't attach to things the way our animals back home do. When a hatchling bonds to someone, it's not affection, it's something closer to a blood oath. I saw it happen once, years back, at the old mining post 2 ridges over. A worker fed a stray hatchling for a season, same as you're doing. Dragon grew up loyal to him like a second shadow. Then the worker got hurt in a cave collapse, nothing serious, just a broken leg, but the dragon tore through half the mining rig trying to get to him. Killed 2 men who got in her way, men who were only trying to help." Daniel felt his stomach tighten. She wouldn't do that. "She might not have a choice," Rutger said. "That's the part you're not understanding. It's not in their control once the bond sets. It's older than reason for them, older than choice." Daniel did not want to believe it, but he also could not ignore the way Rutger's voice had dropped, the way his eyes had gone somewhere far off while he spoke, remembering something he clearly wished he hadn't seen. That night Daniel lay awake in his bunk, staring at the ceiling of the outpost dormitory, turning the warning over in his mind. He thought about Rook's eyes that morning, sharp and steady, and wondered if there was already something locked into place behind them that he could not undo even if he wanted to. He decided he did not want to undo it. The next morning he went to the bridge as always, and Rook was waiting, bigger again than the day before, her wings now long enough to cast a real shadow across the planks. She made the small churring sound she always made when she saw him, and something about the sound had changed too, deeper now, less like a hatchling and more like a young creature finding its voice. "You heard all that talk, huh?" Daniel said, sitting down across from her, close enough now that he had to be careful of her tail. "About what dragons like you are supposed to do to people like me." She tilted her head, watching him with an intensity that felt almost human. "I don't scare easy," Daniel said. "Figured you should know that. Whatever happens, I'm not gonna be the guy who fed you for a month and then walked away because some old-timer got spooked by a story." He was not sure how much of it she understood, but she pressed her head against his shoulder, the weight of her surprising him, and stayed there for a long moment while the wind moved over the ravine. Word reached the dragonkin elders faster than Daniel expected. He would learn later that dragonkin had ways of sensing a bond forming from a distance. Some instinct passed between their kind that alerted the elders when a hatchling's loyalty locked onto someone outside the nest. Within days, murmurs began among the dragonkin who occasionally crossed the bridge to trade with the outpost. They watched Daniel with new interest now, some with curiosity, some with open disapproval. An old trader named Kessa stopped him near the bridge one afternoon, her scales the deep green of moss-covered stone, her voice carrying the weight of many decades. "You should not have fed her," Kessa said, not unkindly, but firm. "Humans do not understand what they start when they show kindness to our young." "She was starving," Daniel said. "What was I supposed to do? Let her stay that way?" Kessa studied him for a long moment. "That is the trouble with your kind. You do the right thing without understanding the cost of it." She glanced toward the bridge, where Rook sat watching them both. "The elders will not let this stand. A bond between hatchling and human breaks old law. Someone will come to sever it before it grows any deeper." Daniel felt a cold weight settle in his chest, but he did not back down. "Let them come," he said. "I'm not giving her up because it's inconvenient for somebody's old rules." Kessa did not answer. She only looked at him with something like pity and something like respect, before turning and walking back toward the far cliffs, leaving Daniel standing on the bridge with a growing dragon at his side and a storm he did not yet understand gathering on the horizon. The sky over the ravine turned a strange copper color the morning Vosk arrived, as if the weather itself had taken notice of who was coming. Daniel heard the wing beats before he saw him, a slow, heavy rhythm that shook loose gravel from the cliffside. Rook heard it too. She went stiff beside him, her churring silenced, her body pressed low against the bridge planks like she was trying to make herself smaller. "Easy," Daniel said quietly, though he was not sure if he was talking to her or himself. Vosk landed on the far end of the bridge with a weight that made the whole structure groan. He was easily 3 times the size of Rook, his scales a deep charcoal black, scarred in places from what Daniel guessed were decades of hard living. His eyes, when they settled on Daniel, held none of the curiosity Kessa's had. They held judgment. "You are the one who fed her," Vosk said. His voice was low and rough, each word deliberate, like stone grinding against stone. "I am," Daniel said, standing straighter than he felt. "Do you understand what you have done?" "I fed a hungry animal, that's all I did." Vosk's tail lashed once against the bridge railing, a sharp, controlled motion that spoke of restrained anger. "She is not an animal. She is one of my kind, a hatchling of my clutch, lost during a transport storm 3 weeks past, and you have let her bond herself to a human who will be dust and memory before she reaches half her years." Daniel felt Rook press closer against his side, and he put a steadying hand on her neck without thinking. "That's not really something either of us decided," he said. "It just happened." "That is precisely the problem," Vosk said. "Bonds like this are not choices humans are meant to make. They are sacred, meant only for our own kind, formed with full understanding of what is given and what is owed. You understand nothing of what you have taken on." "So teach me," Daniel said. Vosk went still, clearly not expecting the answer. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind moving through the ravine and the distant creak of the bridge cables. "You wish to understand," Vosk said slowly, "what it means to be worthy of a hatchling's loyalty." "I wish for you to stop looking at her like she made a mistake," Daniel said. "She's scared. Whatever this is between us, it's real to her, and I'm not gonna stand here and let you scare her over rules she didn't ask to break." Something shifted in Vosk's expression, something Daniel could not quite name. "Very well," the elder said. "If you wish to prove yourself worthy of the bond she has given you, you will face the trials our kind set for those who would claim kinship with a hatchling. Fail, and I sever the bond myself, whether either of you wishes it or not." Daniel did not know what the trials would involve, but he did not hesitate. "Fine, let's get started." The first trial came without warning. Vosk simply turned and launched himself over the ravine, calling back a single word: "Follow." Daniel had no wings, no way to cross the open air the way Dragonkin could, and he understood, watching Vosk's shape shrink against the sky, that this was the point. The trial was not about matching a dragon's strength. It was about testing whether he would even try. He ran the long way, down the ravine path and up the far switchback trail, a route that took the better part of 2 hours on foot, while Vosk waited at the top, unmoving, watching him climb. By the time Daniel reached the top, his legs burned and his shirt was soaked through with sweat, but he did not stop and he did not turn back. "You could have refused," Vosk said when Daniel finally reached the summit. "Didn't feel like an option," Daniel said, catching his breath. The second trial was worse. Vosk led him to a narrow ledge overlooking a drop that made Daniel's stomach turn just to look at it, and told him to stay there through the night without food, without shelter, while the frontier wind howled around the rock face. Daniel sat through it with his jacket pulled tight, teeth chattering, watching the stars wheel overhead, and did not move from the spot until dawn. The third trial was the strangest of all. Vosk simply sat across from him and asked questions, one after another, about Daniel's life, his family back on Earth, why he had come to the frontier, what he wanted from his years out here. Daniel answered honestly, even when the honesty was uncomfortable, even when it meant admitting he did not always know what he was doing, that he had come to the frontier partly to escape a life that had never quite fit him, that he was, in many ways, still figuring things out. "Humans lie about themselves more than any creature I know," Vosk said when the questions were done, "and yet you have not lied once." "Didn't see the point," Daniel said. "You'd have known anyway." Vosk studied him for a long time, the copper sky beginning to fade toward evening. "In 60 years, I have tested 11 humans who claimed devotion to our kind. 9 gave up before the second trial. The other 2 lied to me by the third." "And me?" "You," Vosk said, "are the first who did not try to prove himself worthy. You simply did what needed doing, without complaint, without performance." The elder's massive head turned toward the ravine, toward the bridge where Rook still waited, watching the distant cliffs for any sign of them. "That is not what I expected from your kind." Daniel felt something loosen in his chest, cautious hope where there had only been dread. "So the bond stays." Vosk did not answer right away. "The trials are done," he said finally. "What comes next is not mine to decide alone. There are others among the elders who will not be so easily swayed by persistence and honest answers. This is not over, human. It has only just begun." Alarm that woke the outpost that night was not the usual storm warning. It was sharper, more urgent, a rising wail that had every worker scrambling out of their bunks before their eyes had fully adjusted to the dark. Daniel was on his feet before he even registered what the sound meant, pulling on his boots with hands that had gone cold, with instinct rather than thought. "Raiders," someone shouted from the hallway, "ships coming in low over the west ridge." The outpost had faced trouble before, small things, equipment theft, the occasional dispute with passing traders, but nothing like what was happening now. Through the window, Daniel could see the shapes of unfamiliar aircraft cutting across the night sky, sleek and fast, moving with the coordinated precision of a planned assault rather than a random raid. Sky pirates. The kind that hit isolated frontier posts for tech and supplies, then vanished before any real defense could be organized. Daniel grabbed his jacket and ran for the main yard, where chaos had already taken hold. Workers were pulling equipment crates toward the shelter bunkers, shouting instructions that overlapped into noise. Overhead, one of the raider ships banked low and released a burst of stunning fire that dropped 2 workers near the fuel shed. Daniel's heart hammered as he ran toward them, and that was his mistake. He was in the open when the second wave of raiders touched down. Rough hands seized him from behind before he even heard them land. He fought, throwing an elbow back hard enough to hear someone grunt in pain, but there were 3 of them, armored and quick, and within moments his hands were bound, and he was being dragged toward a waiting transport, boots scraping uselessly against the dirt. "Got a live one," one of the raiders called out, voice muffled behind a helmet. "Outpost personnel, worth something on the trade circuit if the frontier settlements want him back." Daniel twisted against the grip, shouting for help that could not reach him over the roar of engines and the chaos of the raid. He was hauled toward the transport ramp, and for a moment he thought that was going to be the end of it, a quiet disappearance into the frontier dark, another name added to the outpost's list of losses. Then the sky above the ravine tore open with a sound Daniel had never heard before, a deep, furious roar that shook the ground beneath his captor's boots. Rook came down out of the darkness like something out of an old story, wings spread wide enough to blot out the stars, her scales catching the light of the burning fuel shed in flashes of copper and grey. She was fully grown now in a way that startled even Daniel, months of impossible growth culminating in this single terrible moment, and she did not hesitate. She slammed into the raider holding Daniel's arm with the force of a falling boulder, sending him sprawling across the dirt. The raiders scrambled, weapons swinging up toward her, but she was faster than their aim, faster than anything Daniel had ever seen move. She tore through the group with a fury that had nothing of the careful, controlled creature he had watched grow up beside him on that bridge. This was something older, something that Dragonkin law was built to prevent precisely because of how uncontrollable it became once unleashed. She was not fighting like a trained warrior. She was fighting like something that could not imagine a world where Daniel did not exist in it. "Rook, wait," Daniel started, still bound, still trying to twist free, but she was already past hearing him, her focus narrowed entirely to the threat around him. One raider managed to fire a stun round that caught her across the shoulder. She staggered, let out a sound of pain that cut through Daniel worse than any injury of his own could have, and then turned on the shooter with a speed that left no room for a second shot. The raiders who remained standing began to fall back, shouting to each other about the size of the creature, about how this outpost had not been in any of the intelligence reports. By the time the last transport lifted off, abandoning the raid entirely rather than face her again, the yard was littered with scattered equipment and retreating footprints, but no more raiders remained standing. Rook turned back toward Daniel, chest heaving, blood welling from the stun wound at her shoulder, and crossed the distance between them in 2 long strides before lowering her head to nose gently at his bound hands. "I'm okay," Daniel said, voice shaking as he worked his wrists free of the loosened rope. "I'm okay, you hear me? You did it. It's over." She pressed her head against his chest, and for a moment neither of them moved, the outpost around them slowly quieting as workers emerged from the bunkers to survey the damage. It was Rutger who found them first, his face pale as he took in the wreckage, the scorched dirt, the massive dragon curled protectively around Daniel like a wall no one could hope to breach. "She tore through 6 of them," Rutger said quietly, almost to himself. 6 armed raiders, and she didn't even slow down. Daniel looked up at him, still catching his breath. "She saved my life." "I know," Rutger said. "That's what worries me." He looked at Rook, at the wound on her shoulder that she seemed not to even notice, too focused on Daniel to acknowledge her own pain. "The elders are going to hear about this by morning. What she just did, breaking cover like that, fighting without sanction, defying every rule about controlled aggression. They're not going to see a hero, Daniel. They're going to see exactly what they warned you about." Daniel looked at Rook, at the fierce, unwavering loyalty in her eyes even now, exhausted and injured, and felt something harden in his chest, something that had nothing to do with fear. "Then I'll make them see it different," he said, "because I'm not losing her over this, not after what she just did for me." Above them, the copper light of dawn was beginning to creep over the ravine, and somewhere beyond the far cliffs, word of the night's events was already beginning to travel toward the Dragonkin Council, carried on wings faster than either of them could outrun. The council chamber was carved directly into the tallest spire of the Dragonkin cliffs, a hollowed-out space so large that Daniel's footsteps echoed off walls he could barely see the top of. He had never been inside Dragonkin territory before, and under different circumstances he might have marveled at the smooth, ancient stone worn soft by centuries of claws and wingbeats. As it was, he could only focus on the row of massive shapes seated along the raised stone ledges above him, 7 elders in total, their eyes all fixed on him and on Rook, who stood pressed close beside him despite the bandage still wrapped around her shoulder. Vosk sat among them, though he said nothing yet, his expression unreadable. "The hatchling broke the law of controlled aggression," said the elder in the center, an ancient dragon with pale, cracked scales and a voice like wind through dry leaves. Her name, Daniel had learned on the walk-in, was Threya, and she was said to be the oldest of the council. She fought without sanction, without restraint, endangering herself and revealing Dragonkin's strength to outsiders who may report it to hostile parties. This is precisely the danger our law was written to prevent. "She saved my life," Daniel said, before anyone could stop him. "That is not in dispute," Threya said, not unkindly, but firm. The question before this council is not whether her actions were effective. It is whether a bond that produces such reckless devotion can be permitted to continue, or whether it endangers both her and every human she may one day be moved to defend in such a manner. Daniel looked around at the assembled elders, at their ancient, weathered faces, and understood that arguing with careful logic was not going to move them. He had never been a man of clever words. He decided, standing there in the vast stone chamber, that he would simply tell the truth as plainly as he knew how. "I'm not going to pretend I understand your laws," he said. "I don't know the history behind them, and I won't stand here and act like I do. But I know what I saw that night. I saw someone I care about get hurt trying to protect me, and I know that if the roles were reversed, I would have done exactly the same thing, laws or no laws. That's not recklessness. That's just what it means to love somebody enough to not let them get taken." A murmur ran through the elders at the word love, several of them exchanging glances Daniel could not interpret. "You speak of love," said one of the other elders, a dragon whose scales were the deep red of old rust. "But you are a human. Your kind's devotions burn bright and fade fast. What happens when you grow old or die in some frontier accident, as your kind so often does? What becomes of her then, bonded forever to a grief she cannot outrun?" Daniel felt Rook shift beside him, her head lowering slightly, and he reached out without thinking and rested his hand against her neck. "I don't have a good answer for that," he admitted. "I wish I did. Maybe she'll grieve. Maybe it'll be hard, harder than anything either of us can imagine right now. But that's true of any bond worth having, isn't it? You don't refuse to love something just because it might end in loss. If that was the rule, nobody would ever love anything at all." He looked up at Threya, meeting her ancient eyes directly. "She chose me before either of us understood what that meant. I didn't ask for it, and neither did she, not really, not in any way either of us could control. But I'm not going to stand here and pretend I regret it, because I don't, not for 1 second, and whatever happens to me someday, I'd rather she have this, have had it, than never have had it at all." The chamber fell silent. Threya studied him for a long moment, and then turned her gaze to Vosk, who had remained quiet through the entire proceeding. "You tested him," Threya said. "What is your judgment?" Vosk rose slowly from his ledge, his massive form casting a long shadow across the chamber floor. "I tested him with trials meant to break the will of any who claimed devotion without understanding," he said. "He did not perform for me, he did not lie, he simply endured, without complaint, because he believed it was owed to her. I have tested 11 humans in 60 years, and none showed what this one has shown, first in the trials, and now here, standing before us with nothing to offer but honesty." He turned to look at Rook, who met his gaze without flinching, standing tall despite her injury. "And she," Vosk continued, "broke from the nest, defied every instinct of caution our kind is taught from hatching, not out of recklessness, but because the bond she formed gave her something our laws never accounted for, a reason strong enough to override fear itself." He paused. "Perhaps it is not the bond that is flawed. Perhaps it is the law that has never known what to do with devotion this complete." Threya was quiet for a long time, the chamber holding its breath around her. Finally, she spoke. "The old law was written in a time when we knew nothing of humans, when we assumed their short years meant shallow hearts. This human has shown us otherwise, at some cost to himself and no small risk to her." She looked at Rook, then at Daniel. "I will not sever this bond, but I will not pretend the law can remain unchanged either, not after tonight. We will not simply forbid such bonds going forward, nor will we ignore the danger they carry. We will study this. We will learn what it means, properly, so that no hatchling and no human must face what these two faced tonight without guidance." Relief washed through Daniel so suddenly his knees nearly buckled. Beside him, Rook let out a low, warbling sound that was unmistakably joy, pressing her head hard against his shoulder. "This council is not finished with its work," Threya said, rising from her ledge. "But you too may go, and human," she added, as Daniel turned to leave, "whatever comes of the studies we undertake, know that this council will remember what you said here today. It is not often that your kind teaches mine something new about loyalty." Daniel bowed his head, unsure of the proper dragonkin gesture, but offering it anyway, and walked out of the stone chamber with Rook at his side. The weight of judgment finally lifted from both their shoulders. 5 years is not a long time by Dragonkin standards, but it was long enough to change the frontier outpost into something Daniel barely recognized from the small maintenance post he had first arrived at. What had once been a handful of sheds and a single supply bridge was now a growing settlement, half human, half dragonkin, spread along both sides of the ravine in a way nobody would have predicted the night Rook first tore through a raider camp to save his life. The council's studies, once begun, had not stayed quiet or slow. Word of Daniel and Rook's bond spread through Dragonkin territory faster than anyone expected, and within a year other hatchlings had begun forming similar attachments to humans across the frontier, some among traders, some among settlers, a few among children born on the outpost who grew up alongside young dragons, the way other children grew up with dogs or horses. The old law, once so rigid, had softened into something new, something the elders themselves seemed almost proud to have helped shape. Daniel still worked maintenance on the bridge, though these days he had a small crew under him, both human and dragonkin, since dragonkin claws turned out to be remarkably useful for reaching relay panels no human ladder could manage. The bridge itself had been rebuilt twice since that first rainy morning, widened and strengthened to handle the increased traffic between the two halves of the growing settlement, though the original stone edge where Rook used to perch as a hatchling had been left untouched, a small, deliberate choice nobody had needed to explain. Every morning, without fail, Rook was there. She was fully grown now, her scales a deep, rich blue-gray that caught the morning light like polished stone, her wingspan wide enough to cast long shadows across the bridge planks when she stretched them out to greet the day. She did not wait out of separation anxiety anymore, not the way she once had as a frightened, starving hatchling with nowhere else to go. She waited because it was simply what she did, what she had always done, and what she intended to keep doing for as long as either of them drew breath. "You know," Daniel said one morning, setting down his tool bag beside her, "you really don't have to come out here every single day. I do trust you'll still be around if you sleep in once in a while." Rook made the low, warbling sound that had become, over the years, unmistakably her version of laughter, and nudged him hard enough with her head that he nearly lost his footing. All right, he said, laughing despite himself, "just saying." He had grown older too, in the way humans did, small lines settling around his eyes that had not been there 5 years ago, his hands rougher from years of frontier work. He did not know what Vosk's old warning about human years fading fast would mean for them someday, and he had made peace mostly with not knowing. Some mornings the thought crept in anyway, quiet and uninvited, wondering how many more years like this one they would get. But those thoughts never stayed long, not with Rook's steady presence beside him, not with the sound of the settlement waking up around them, voices calling greetings across the bridge in both human speech and the low, rolling tones of dragonkin. Below the bridge, in the shallow water where the ravine widened into a calm pool, a group of children played in the morning light, human and dragonkin both, their laughter carrying up on the breeze. 2 of the youngest dragon hatchlings, born just that spring to parents who had themselves grown up on the settlement, chased a human boy along the water's edge, while an older girl tried, with limited success, to referee the game. It was an ordinary scene now, unremarkable in a way that would have seemed impossible 5 years ago, back when a single bonded hatchling had been enough to summon an elder across half the frontier in judgment. Threya visited sometimes, older now but still sharp-eyed, still watching the settlement's growth with the careful attention of someone who had staked her own reputation on believing it could work. She had told Daniel once, on one such visit, that the council no longer called it the old law or the new law. They simply called it understanding and treated it as something still being learned, one bond, one settlement, one small act of kindness at a time. Vosk had settled near the outpost too, in a way nobody quite expected from the elder who had once arrived breathing judgment down on Daniel's neck. He had taken to training the younger dragonkin hatchlings in flight and hunting, and more than once Daniel had caught him watching Rook with something that looked almost like pride, though the old dragon would never have admitted to it outright. As the morning wore on and the last of the mist burned off the ravine, Daniel finished his check of the relay panels, same as he had 1,000 mornings before, and sat down on the worn stone edge beside Rook to eat his breakfast, same as always, sharing pieces of it with her the way he had since the very first day. "Still can't believe you picked me," he said quietly, watching the settlement stir to life below them. "Out of everybody, everything, you just decided I was the one." Rook turned her head toward him, her eyes holding the same steady, patient warmth they always had, the same look that had first stopped him in his tracks on a rainy morning 5 years ago. She did not need words to answer him. She never really had. She simply stayed, the way she always did, waiting at the same bridge, for the one human who had never once made her wait for nothing, and who never intended to start now.